Okay, so once it's done in Nuke, we can drag our render folder. Okay, let me delete this here. That's the grid. Let's see here. This is from 3D Max, just rendered out. Okay, and let's get our footage in. Okay, so this is just going to be a very basic setup. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my rendered element and press M for merge, and I'm going to connect my B to my background. Okay, now when you place it over like that, it's going to be laid over. So I'm going to add in a pre-multiply, so only the shadows come out. Okay, and let's test play this. Now you see that it is a little bit shaky, and that's because if I press 1 here, it starts at frame 0, and if I press 2 here, it starts at frame 1, and that's because Max renders at frame 0. So I'm going to select my 3D element, press tab, and then retime, and then I'm going to change my output range starting at 1. Okay, so that will make both shots synced. Okay. Okay. And now it gets a little bit more complex than this, but the basic thing is you want to adjust the darks and your lights to make it match your background. So what we first do is add in a grade node, which is G, and you adjust your black points, okay, so it matches your similar black points in your scene. Okay, and you can adjust the color and the gamma by pressing on here. If the dark area is a little bit green, or you feel that it needs a little bit green, you can add a little bit there to match that. Okay, and then you can adjust your white point so that your lighter points match your scene here. Okay, we can bring it up or down. Okay. Okay, or you can also adjust your colors to make it more red or blue. Okay, to match. Okay, it gets a little bit more involved in that, but that's like the basic colors. You want to make sure your black point and your white point matches. Okay, and then your midtones or your gamma here, you can change overall or change the color to that. If you need more red, more green, more blue. Okay. Ideally, of course, is you want to get this right in 3D as much as possible, and then do your fine adjustments in Nuke. And then the next step you want to do is you add your blurs. So I'm going to hit tab and then press B for blur. And if we zoom in close here, we'll see that our 3D is always crispier than our footage. So maybe start off with a 1 blur. Okay, so this, I'm going to press D to disable this so you can test. See how it blurs out a little bit by pressing D. Maybe 2. 2 is too much. So maybe like 1.2 or 1.4. Okay, something like that. Okay. Then sometimes the edge blur is needed where your edges are too sharp, and then in that case we type in tab ed edge blur, and you see that our edges is blurred. So if I turn that on and off, you can see the default 3 might be a little too much, so let's add it in 2, maybe 1. So I think 1 might be enough in this case. Okay, maybe 2. Okay. Right, and then we can add in more. For instance, we need some kind of light light glare back into our object here, otherwise known as a light wrap. So I'm going to type in tab light wrap. Okay, and what this does is it will detect anywhere that's bright and push it on back into our element. So I'm going to connect it back to here, and what it's going to do here is get the white information in the sky here and project it back onto our building here. So if you can see, if I turn this up here, you'll see that it comes up here. You don't want to overdo it, just a little bit. Okay, so this is without width, okay. We can change the diffuse here. Okay, just give it a little bit. Okay, okay, and you can see some of that is from the asphalt bouncing back onto our building. Okay, and probably one more thing that we want to do is add in motion blur. So I'm going to hit tab motion blur and just use the first one. Okay, okay, now the motion blur will slow down your rendering, but if we go to another frame here, let's see here, something like this, and if we zoom in, we'll see that there's let's start off with 0 shutter samples so we can see what's going on here. I'm going to change it to, like, say 2 here so we can see it at work here. Okay, so with 0 and 2 we don't see anything, but if I change it to 2, you'll see that there's seemingly two copies of the building. And if I change it to 4, you will see 4, and you can increase this until you see a gradual blur 8 here. And let's turn that back to 2 here, and now if I increase the shutter time to 4, you'll see that the distance increases. So these are what those two do. This increases the time before 2 frames, after 2 frames, and this adds in the in-between, so it gets blurry. Okay, for a shot like this that doesn't have a lot of motion blur, you want to keep it probably a little low, and maybe hit this to 3 or something like that. So just a little bit, and I'm going to press D to disable and enable. Okay, and you want to match that motion blur to your scene. Okay, that might be even a little too much. Maybe 1.5. Okay, and 2 here. You don't want to overdo this here because this takes a lot of time to update. Okay, and that's about it. Oh, and also if we want to render, we press the W here, and you can set it to wherever you want here, and let's call this render.mov, enter. And when we do that, oops, here .mov, enter. And when we do that, we can change this to photo JPEG, preferably. If you don't have photo JPEG, you can do Apple ProRes 444, but photo JPEG here, change it to move 32. Okay, and then you can just render, and you will have your QuickTime. Okay, make sure it's an input and a time range. Click OK, and that's about it.